Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to find out what you're about to know. This is your Screen Queen, your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello, and welcome back to The Screen Queen. This is your host on the East Coast, your lean, mean, movie-talking machine. And man, do we have an episode that's going to be music to your ears. Or is it? That's kind of the question with Chicago. Chicago came out in one of the best and worst times in 2002. To this day, Chicago is still not the kind of music to some people's ears. Chicago is a great movie, okay? It is. As much as it can be hated on, it is a spectacle for how much they brought the pizzazz, the jazz, the work to make this musical come to life. And that can be a hit or miss with a lot of people. And Chicago was a hit, but it didn't miss with a lot of people. People took issue with the fact that it took home the best Oscar when the other movie, The Pianist, should have taken the Oscar for Best Picture. And a lot of people thought, oh, well, Chicago's a musical. Of course it's going to win. Like, well, yes and no. If it put in the work and people voted for it, then people are going to vote for what they think is the best. The Pianist is well, if you had the choice to sit through a musical or a very depressing movie, which one would you pick? I would have picked the musical. There are a lot of factors that went into Chicago that still divide people to this day, and it's going to be discussed on this episode. So, put your dancing shoes on, because we're about to dive into Chicago. So I have to admit, Chicago is my all-time favorite musical, and that's coming from someone that's not a big fan of musicals. Talking about musicals has never been an easy conversation. I remember back in my high school days when I used to take chorus class. Honestly, worst elective I ever took in my life. Phantom of the Opera was always brought up as the best musical ever. And at that point, I didn't really see much musicals, but it was always an unfair conversation that it was always overrated that would be the all-time favorite musical. And back then when I was in high school, that was the talked about musical in my school. People loved it so much. I think because of like the gothic elements behind it and its mysteriousness. But also too, they just loved the bravado for everything. And I'm like, okay, I'm getting a little done with this musical. And it really burned me about musicals. And then the next year, when I took a cinema class, that's why I'm here today making a podcast show. I had to start somewhere to further develop my love for movies. Anyway, tangent over. We had a musical elective. And I'm like, oh no, I don't want, I went through this last year. I can't do this again. I cannot be belittled for something I don't like. But thankfully with my cinema class, there was no right or wrong answers. There was no belittling someone for their preferences, which was wonderful about that class. You kind of left your judgment at the door. And we dove into musicals, and we got the whole history about it, and we watched a couple of different movies. We watched Singing in the Rain. We watched another one with Fred Astaire. Can't think of it on top of my head. And then we watched Chicago. And mind blown. I was like, I love this movie. I love everything about it. This is so great. I love the music. I love the cast. It was like, I found the perfect musical for me. Whenever you watch a certain movie, it's like, you can have your own preferences to genres, and you may not think strongly for some certain genres, but there's like a specific movie that's just made for you that has everything you're looking for. Chicago was it for me. That was the musical that definitely was right up my alley. I can count on my hand how many musicals that I enjoy. Chicago, Grease. That's it. See, there's not much there because musicals are not really something that I'm geared towards. No pun on Richard Gere's name, but I'm glad that joke kind of coincidentally came up. There's this big stigma about musicals that if you love musicals, you have to go all the way. You gotta watch them on Broadway. You gotta see the other performances. And I get that. Last week's episode, Aelita Battle Angel. There was a big thing about whitewashing. It's like, well, don't say you like this American version. Make sure that you watch its predecessor to know where it came from and respect the origins. I totally get that. But musicals are not really going to be something that people are going to follow. They're just going to like it for the moment and take away what they want and go on with their life. They like it for just that movie origin and don't have an interest in going into the Broadway. If they do, great. If not, that's also great. The point is that you're entertained by it. There's been times over the years that I've been crapped on for not liking the Phantom of the Opera, which is the cream of the crop of musicals, and like, yes, it is, but it's a different type of musical that I'm not really on board with. I'll watch it if it's there, but it's not something that I'm going to live and die over. Same thing with Chicago. I love it, but it's also something that I'm not going to be frothing at the mouth over to go see it on Broadway. But I have done my homework to see that there's been many people that have dipped their toes into the Broadway scene and have played many of the titular characters from the story of Chicago, which is fantastic. And I thought about that heavily going into this episode about how there shouldn't be this hatred towards someone that is liking what they see and just sticking with that. No one should have to feel bad that they don't take their love forward with going into something, and it's their decision. Like I say in every episode, you choose how you want to be entertained. And there are some people that can just digest musicals better in movie form than having to sit in a theater and see the performances. Everyone has their different patience when it comes to something. And years ago, I was having a conversation in the car with my friend Darcy, who I call my Bat Mom, and she is a diehard musical fan. She will live and die for them, resurrect herself, and live and die for them again. And I've always respected that about her, and it really changed the way I saw musicals. Even though they're not something that I care about and nothing that I really want to see on Broadway, but like, I get to know firsthand from her about what that history is like, and knowing all about that scene for people that really love the origin of the musical when it was in theater or on Broadway. And I had brought up in the topic about musicals that I liked Grease and Chicago, and I even have a little small affinity for Grease too, just a little one. And she just said to me, well, of course you liked Grease and Chicago. And I'm like, yeah, I do. What? And then years later, I'm like, oh, now I get it. It's because I'd be a little mad too if all the people cared about was the adaptation and not the origin. And a lot of people do kind of forget about its origins, and now it's still of popularity now that people are taking more of a respect to know the origin story for that story and want to respect where it came from and not solely rely upon the movie adaptation that takes away that experience and seeing it on Broadway and getting to see these people do these amazing performances. And it's absolutely wonderful, and it's something I had taken into consideration when I really poured in the homework for being a movie buff and eventually talking about movies, is like all about that origin story. And I can definitely understand that. It's always going to be a double-edged sword when it comes to the movie adaptation of a musical, whether there's one side of the sword that's going to be liking the origin story in Broadway and hating the musical adaptation, or the other side of loving the origin story and also appreciating that it went to the big screen, even if you have some minor issues with it, which is going to happen. There have been some minor issues that people have taken away from some of the musicals that we've had in the new millennium, and most of that did really start with Chicago. I can't really say for certain that it was Chicago because, again, your girl's not too versed in the whole world of musicals, but that's somewhat relatively near that time frame when things changed and people were kind of taking issue with how they went about it. One tiny example I want to make before we go on to our next point in the episode. Jersey Boys is somewhat a musical, but it's like a biography musical about the Four Seasons. Clint Eastwood went out of his way to get people from Broadway. He did not want actors that are musically trained or could be musically trained. There were some people like Paul Dano was in the talks of it, but Clint Eastwood was like, no, I need people that are from the origin, from the theater. I need that type of performance. I don't need movie performance. I need theater performance. And shit, it shows. It really does. After I watched Jersey Boys, it really made me think about the musicals I've watched. But damn, like, it's a lot that goes into musicals. And it's something that I can appreciate even though I'm not into it, for it being a hit or a miss. And like I said at the beginning, Chicago was a hit that really kind of missed the mark with a few people solely because of feeling like it was just something made that could be an easy Oscar win and may or may not have followed the original origin stories of the musical, and also some of the casting choices that you would want someone a little bit differently, or you would want someone from the theater. What was going to be the double-edged sword that just never really going to end? It's going to have like something heavier on the other side of that sword. But yeah, that's kind of how I want to start off with this episode. It was the thing that really hung on my mind, thinking about the whole history of musicals and how it's always been a tit for tat when it comes to the movie adaptations. So now it's time to talk about the cast of Chicago. And as much as I've heard there's been some issues about some of the casting surrounding Chicago, I gotta be honest, it's a perfect cast. Catherine Zeta-Jones knocked it out of the park as Velma Kelly, and she solely did the movie just because she wanted to sing all that jazz. But there were other ideas for her, for Roxy, for Billy Flynn, for a lot of people. And as I was going through the IMDb trivia to see who else could have been the characters, I was shocked at who else could have been. There's been some like names that come to mind that I remember were considered, and it's been talked about for years because it bounces around. Like John Travolta was originally in talks for Billy Flynn, and he has regretted that he passed on the role. But we've already seen him as Danny Zuko. I'm like, I feel like that'd be grasping for straws. Like, okay, well, you're good in musicals. I think you covered that base. He's really good, but there could have been a different musical that he could have done. This kind of would have been like the same thing like Danny Zuko. There are other things I just read here, like Madonna was wanted specifically for Velma Kelly. I could see it, but at the same time, I feel like that doesn't present a challenge because Madonna's really good in those things. I would have loved to have seen someone else really take the reins that would be unexpected, like Catherine Zeta-Jones. Goldie Hawn was also considered. Kathy Bates, Rosie O'Donnell, Nicole Kidman, Michelle Pfeiffer, Gwyneth Paltrow, Kristen Chenoweth for Roxy Hart or Mary Sunshine, Cameron Diaz, Whoopi Goldberg for Matron Mama Morton, and Britney Spears by former executive disgraced producer Harvey Weinstein for Kitty Baxter. Toni Collette, Winona Ryder, and Marissa Tomei were all considered. I even read that Michael Jackson was considered for Billy Flynn. And for a second, I saw it and I'm like, damn, it's probably the one that I wish I could have seen. I would have loved to have seen that. Don't know how it would have worked, but it would have been interesting to see that. But there are also some other names that come to mind that I'm currently scrolling through to find. Oh, there's some more here. Angelica Houston, Pam Grier, and Bette Midler were also considered for Matron Mama Morton, which that makes sense. I could have seen it, but all hail the Queen. Queen Latifah blew out of the park. I love Queen Latifah, and I'm trying not to put so much favoritism behind it, but she had the right amount of gumption, gall, sass, and intimidation for Matron Mama Morton. And she is a very intimidating character that has her own qualms, her own plans, her own schemes. And Queen Latifah has played scheming characters before. That just wrote itself perfectly. And I see here, that Keanu Reeves is also in talks about playing Amos Hart, who is the amazing, awfully treated husband of Roxy Hart. And that would have been weird to see Keanu Reeves play that. And says they hear that Charlie Sheen also read. Oh, that's just weird. Oh, I got an image in my head and I didn't like it. Oh. Oh, here's some more names here. Jennifer Aniston, Christina Applegate, Patricia Arquette, Drew Barrymore, Juliette Binoche, Kate Blanchett, Sandra Bullock, Jamie Lee Curtis, Ellen DeGeneres, yikes, Cameron Diaz, Claire Forlani, sorry I'm messing up these names, Jodie Foster, Heather Graham, Rachel Griffiths, Angie Harmon, Anne Heche, rest in peace, Katie Holmes, Helen Hunt, Mila Jovovich, Ashley Judd, Patsy Kensit. Wow, Patsy Kensit, I haven't heard that name for a while. Nicole Kidman, Lucy Lawless, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Tia Leone, Rona Mitra, Bridget Mahonahan, Bibi Ririth, I'm sorry if I fucked up that name, Monica Potter, Vanessa Shaw, Hilary Swank, I could have seen that, Mira Sorvino, Charlize Theron, Marissa Tomei, Deborah Winger, and Kate Winslet were all considered for the role of Roxy Hart. You see how many fucking names were considered for a lot of these characters? And that right there is just for Roxy Hart. And I read a little bit about Velma Kelly, and I know a snippet about who was considered for Billy Flynn. Oh Lord, there's more. Neve Campbell, Angelina Jolie, Jennifer Lopez, and Winona Ryder were all considered for the role of Velma Kelly. I'm trying to kind of skip over these names because some of the trivia, mishes in other familiar names. Oh, here we go. I found it. For Billy Flynn. John Cusack, Rupert Everett, Kevin Kline, Steve Martin, Sean Penn, and Kevin Spacey were all considered for the role of Billy Flynn. I remembered Steve Martin. That one always hung in my head because I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, like I mentioned with John Travolta and Michael Jackson, I feel like that would not be a challenge. Everyone brought their A game with being actors and actresses that have a very good voice and could easily transition into theater. I could have very well have seen Catherine Zeta-Jones, Renee Zellwinger, Richard Gere take up a role on theater. They really felt like they were a part of the play. You really felt like you were watching a theater production. Even though, yes, it definitely has a cinematic quality to it, it still had a lot of that spotlight thing because it really is like a movie about people trying to get into the theater business or show business. Like something about a stage, so it really does need to look staged and feel like it's edited like having the cinematography edits and cinematographically shot, that you really feel the spotlight, and you feel that with all these characters and the amount of pizzazz that is put into Chicago. Chicago really is all about pizzazz and shit. Like, they brought 110% into it. Everyone did a fantastic job, and it still shocked me to see Renee Zellwinger put so much singing into it, and to find out that she never went through any singing training, like, at all. She just happened to have a really good voice, and they worked with it. The first time she ever sang was in Empire Records, which eventually led to her performance of Roxy Hart, where they're like, say no more, look at Empire Records. She has a very good singing voice, and her appearance really does look very mousy and a little bit mischievous, that she's going to do whatever it takes to get to the stardom. That's what makes her perfect. Same thing for Catherine Zeta-Jones. She has a very femme fatale look to herself, and it is a movie with a lot of femme fatales, without having to play heavily into film noir. And that's what makes her absolutely perfect for the role of Velma Kelly. And I already mentioned about Matron Mama Morton having that intimidation, and Billy Flynn is the guy that looks so good, but he's a bad guy, and he gets all the murderesses off of death row, but he never goes for the innocent people that truly need his intellect of legal knowledge and legal help to get them through there. He wants the one that has the most juicy gossip behind it, something that has a good story. He lives to feed off of the fodder of the constant crime life of Chicago. Everyone is terrible in this movie, and it's like, damn, I'm rooting for the bad guys. the entire time. And I thought about that heavily thinking about this episode, like, wow, there's no redeeming people in this movie. You just watch as they make terrible decisions one after another and discard others that's getting in their way of getting to the spotlight. With Velma and Roxy, they're both kind of clawing at each other to get to the spotlight. Same thing for Billy Flynn. He's willing to discard other clients to get the better client. There's a part in the movie when Roxy already has this height of publicity, but once another murderer came through, this heiress, I think it was a pineapple heiress played by Lucy Liu, came through, he's like, oh, on the next one, bye kid. Like, it's awful the way that this whole thing thrives off of crime, and it kind of parallels into what is going on today, where a lot of people really do thrive off of crime stories and getting all the juicy details and gossip. Sometimes it's a healthy amount of desire for that knowledge, and sometimes it's not so healthy, and that kind of makes the line cross. And Chicago was one of those films that played on that societal commentary about people and their love for the controversy. Whew. Man, that was a lot. That was an unexpected tangent that just went places, and I appreciate everyone that just sat through that roller coaster. But now, you can't talk about a musical episode without mentioning the music. So, I have mentioned Chicago is my favorite musical, and it is the only musical that I sing in the car. I still listen to the songs all the time. Everything from Cell Block Tango, We Both Reached for the Gun, which is my personal favorite song, by the way. Mr. Cellophane, which actually, I made a reference to Mr. Cellophane in my book series Inglorious Inc., and I will be doing a reading of that much later on in the episode, so get ready for that. I'm going to razzle dazzle you with that one. And there are so many great songs, but before I get into a lot of those songs, I want to talk about one that never really made it into the movie. One that's kind of a surprise. Queen Latifah and Catherine Zeta-Jones did a duet of a song called Class together that never made it into the movie. I mean, you would think with a musical, you kind of have to cover your bases and get everything in there. People want to see a musical adaptation, you give them a musical adaptation. I'd be mad if I was a musical fan and I didn't get to see the song that I was waiting to see in the movie. But honestly, I can't tell you if Class was made for the movie or if it was from the musical. I should have done my homework on it a little bit more, but like I said, your girl's not really much of a musical fan, so I'm a little bit kind of hesitant to go into that world where it's just not my cup of tea. But, and also too, from what I saw, I didn't see much about it on IMDb. If I do find anything, I'll put it in the description box, so I'll do my later homework. Thank you for understanding. Anyway, I've listened to Class. It's okay. Sounds a little, mean and stern to say that, but Class just would be overtaxing the movie. There are so many phenomenal performances and atmospheres that you go into with the way that you go into the entire world building and the world around the lies built within Chicago. And then there's Class, where it's a kind of a wholesome song between, a murderer and a possible lesbian warden just singing together about class. And Catherine Zeta-Jones and Queen Latifah have amazing voices, and it's wonderful to just have one moment that exists. It is a great song. It is nice that these two did have it in there and that it is acknowledged in some of the special features for Chicago. Of all the people that I wouldn't think would sing together, they do a fantastic job because of the chemistry that Queen Latifah and Catherine Zeta-Jones had in the film, kind of feeding into the other's crime, with Velma Kelly doing whatever it takes to get her stardom still there, and Queen Latifah's character, Matron Mama Morton, is more than happy to oblige knowing that she's getting paid for it. It's like, the lack of morality is there, but that's kind of the basis of their relationship, is having a lack of morality. It makes them really good friends. But I do have to take the time to talk about my favorite song, We Both Reached for the Gun. Personally, As much as Cell Block Tango is what defines Chicago in the sense of a musical and its movie adaptation, I have to say that We Both Reached for the Gun is what truly defines the story of Chicago. Just the story itself. The whole thing is about trying to get off of a murder charge, and that's the best example is We Both Reached for the Gun. You want to know how in the world is this guy going to get Roxy off of that, of the murder charge? And perfect. He makes a whole song and dance that she had the convent of the Sacred Heart, and that her husband convinced her to elope one day, and that she was immersed into this world of jazz and liquor, and that she shouldn't have done this, and she knew that she was doing wrong, and then there was a gun involved. And then I tried to take the gun. We both reached for it, but I got it so I could protect my unborn child. It's like, oh, that just screams innocent. But it's actually not. And it's just like an awful morbid song. But damn, like, you do watch Chicago to wonder how in the world is this man who knows how to redo lies as the truth and make it sound so believable and catchy that it's going to be on the front page of the news, and all the journalists are like waiting and waiting and waiting. And I love that part in the movie where you see the journalists have these strings on their arms. It's like Billy Flynn is literally controlling the press, so you know Roxy is in the best and bad hands. Someone that knows she's guilty, and he loves it because he gets this press, he gets the attention. He's just as much as in favor for the spotlight as she is. And damn, like, Richard Gere is so damn catchy in the fucking movie. I was talking to my grandfather about this before I did the episode, where he did have to, like, poke fun of me. He's like, you like it for Richard Gere? And I'm like, yes, I do. Because I wouldn't have penned Richard Gere to be in the movie. There were other people, like I mentioned, that would have fit the bill, but Richard Gere has played anti-heroes and charming characters, and anti-hero charming characters, things like American Gigolo, Internal Affairs, which is kind of an obscure movie, but if you do your homework, you can kind of understand why I say anti-hero and villain of, like, the types of characters that he plays. And of course, Pretty Woman. It's like every single Richard Gere character put together solely in Billy Flynn. He was made for this role with everything that he has played, and it makes him perfect for it. That's just me being personal about it. I'm trying not to get too personal because I don't want to sway my listeners to think differently about Chicago, but it is something that I do want to put in there with how Richard Gere really did fit the shoes of Billy Flynn. You would want someone to fit that character, and looking at his filmography, Richard Gere would be the guy to do it. I know John Travolta would have been great, but John Travolta he doesn't play the best bad guys. The only time he did a great job was Pulp Fiction, and everything else was like, I wouldn't buy him as that. I would still look at Danny Zuko. And Richard Gere hasn't done many plays, so it makes him a fresh face into the world of musicals and musical adaptation movies. Something to think about. As much as this movie has been selected and kind of divided onto what defines Chicago, like I said, Cell Block Tango is kind of the song that people would associate with the original musical and the film adaptation, and then there's We Both Reached for the Gun that really does define Chicago, and then there's songs like Razzle Dazzle that people feel is what truly defines Chicago. It makes it divided. I mean, personally, you pick what you feel defines Chicago. Whichever song you feel is the best, that's what defines Chicago. When realistically, all the songs fit Chicago for a reason. But that's the nice thing about picking your favorite, is that you will always have that favorite part of it and what it means to you. Just like with me in We Both Reached for the Gun. I think I can remember the song without having to look at the lyrics. I'm going to give myself a little test. Okay. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both reached for the gun, the gun, the gun, the gun, oh yes, they both reached for the gun, for that gun. Oh. I remember the first time I, sang that song when the movie was playing, and remembered it, word for word, bounce for bounce, and my mom just kind of looked at me, like, very strangely. I'm like, yes, I have no time on my hands. I love this movie too much. But there are some clever nods to Chicago, as well as some clever nods to the history, the exact history time frame of Chicago, because it does take place in the 1920s. The first nod I'm going to tell you about is one of the original ladies that played Velma Kelly makes a cameo in there. It says right here, in the beginning of the scene introducing matron Mama Morton to the new inmates, Roxy Hart has a brief conversation with a woman smoking a cigarette. This character is played by a longtime Broadway actress, Chita Rivera, who portrayed Velma Kelly in the original 1975 production of Chicago. Now that is pretty cool. I love it when movies do that, whether it's a movie that's adapted from a musical or adapting an original movie, or if they're adapting a TV show, that they'll bring in like the original veterans and be like, listen, we wouldn't have this if it wasn't for this person, and they need to have some sort of display in the movie so someone out there will do their homework and probably later talk about it in a podcast episode. You never know where it's gonna go. But the next one I want to talk about is something that I remembered reading about years and years ago, where the scene where Richard Gere's character, Billy Flynn, is talking to Amos Hart. And Amos is trying to, like, figure out how is he going to get his wife off of death row, even though he should have let the woman rot! But then we wouldn't have Chicago, because Chicago's got to be Chicago, and unfortunately that's the road that it took. And Amos Hart was unfortunately one of those characters that's so beloved but got screwed over and abused in every which way possible, and it's so sad. But it's kind of beautiful in the way that John C. Reilly brought Amos Hart to life, and especially within that scene where he's so kind and he gets so fucking picked on, and he gets picked on from Billy Flynn, where Billy's like, what's your name, Andy something, and it's actually a nod to an old comedy show called Amos and Andy, and we know with his name being Amos and then Andy coming up, it really felt like a nice nod to a very buried part of comedy history with that comedy duo, and I believe they were a comedy duo. I'm kind of scratching my brain here trying to remember something that I read years ago, but if I'm wrong, I'll put it in the description box. So I'll take my accountability if I'm right or wrong. So it's ironic that I found this next piece of information that I'm about to tell you, and it honestly doesn't surprise me. All stories does have some shred or major inspiration from a real life event. I mean, a lot of our stories, they do derive from real life events. And Chicago did derive from a real life event in 1924. It says right here, there were two very public murder trials that occurred in Chicago in 1924. Those of Belula Sheriff Enon and Belva Girder. I will put it in the description box because I know I botched it. Watkins covered these trials for the Chicago Tribune and wrote the character of Mary Sunshine as a self-portrait. For Belva Girder, better known as Velma Kelly, she had a much less glitzy fate. She was acquitted and went on to have a few run-ins with the law, but ended up living a semi-normal life before dying of natural causes in California in 1965 at the age of 80. Although, in the case of Belula Sheriff Annan, aka Roxy Hart, it was more of a grisly end. It's true she was acquitted of murdering her lover thanks to the skills of her highly paid attorney, I think you know who, is based off of that, who was bankrolled by her stunningly loyal husband, who probably was or wasn't Amos, because it doesn't say it in here, and that's okay. I mean, it's 1924, it's going to be a little hard to get all the details where we have that kind of accessibility today. Anyway, she repaid that debt by publicly divorcing him after her release. Oh, probably was Amos. She married 2 more times before her death from tuberculosis 4 years later. Damn! So the woman based off Roxy did not live a very long life. Karma got her! Oh, wow. But, wow, the person that's based off Velma Kelly did kind of go on to lead a charmed life. But, wow, Wow. That makes so much sense. It makes me wonder what Chicago would be like today if it was remade, which that could be kind of a bit of an uncertain thing if someone really does want to take the reins and try again. Especially like I said at the beginning, where some people are very, very picky and a little serious about when it comes to adaptations for how their beloved story is going to be adapted, that it could be the best thing or an insulting thing. So who knows? But if it were adapted, I wonder if they would insert like the grisly fates and say, oh, Roxy died 4 years later and Velma went on to go lead a charmed life and died at 80, to kind of echo to the real life story, to say, oh, well, the real ladies is based off of did not have better life. They didn't have good times after nowadays. Their days were limited. Well, one of their days were limited. The other one had an unlimited amount of days until it ran out. Wow. That was an interesting story that I just learned, and it was cool to kind of experience that with you guys and kind of put the pieces together. Wow. Wow, that was amazing. So now that we're kind of winding down to the end of the episode, I did promise that I was going to do a reading of my book, Inglorious Inc. Now, I could not help myself when I was first writing Inglorious Inc. before I rewrote the book to be clearer and more punctual. Let's just say that. There's a lot more details than that in my other podcast show. But anyway, there's a part of the story where my characters, Cassie, Jules, and Lance, are torturing a man named Nash in a theater. And the theater does take up a huge part of the story for its, like, ominous presence that has a very silly backstory. And right as the character Ace walks in, and then when I went to go rewrite the story, I thought, why not? I'll make a couple more references. It's my favorite musical. I have the opportunity to have as much fun as I want. So here we go. Here is your first exclusive of my book series, Inglorious Inc. on the Screen Queen. Here we go. So if you do want to know where I'm at, it's at page 88. If you have the copy. It's okay if you don't, because I'm reading it to you. Let me see here. When was Ace coming again? Lance asked. His name isn't Ace today. It's Mr. Cellophane, Cassie replied. You're gonna make him sing that damn song again, Jules muttered under his breath. The front door of the once popular theater opened up. Even in the dark theater that only had the stage illuminated, they knew it was Ace. Hey, Mr. Cellophane, Cassie called out, and never failed to make Ace chuckle with the new nickname Cassie called him. He walked down the vacant aisle that used to be filled with people 10 years ago. He took his ratted gray sweater off, tossing it on one of the torn audience seats. Should have been my name, Ace sang as loud as he could to see the annoyed look on Jules' face. And is there another reference in the same pair? No, there's not. That's just it. Okay. There is another part that I mention in here that's in the next couple of chapters, and I'm going to be finding it somewhat soon. You would think that with the fact that I wrote this thing that I would find it. Oh, here it is. I found it. So, the next reference I made to Chicago is at the beginning of chapter 11 called Child's Play. The only thing that existed in the parlor was Cassie singing softly about walking right through Mr. Cellophane. I thought that was kind of a clever way to not make another word-for-word lyric, but just kind of paraphrasing the lyric, and that was very fun to do another one in there. And wouldn't you believe it, I had fun with one more reference that I know is in here somewhere in this thing. It's at the longest chapter in this fucking book. Here we go. Okay, so here's the last reference. So try not to, give so much of the plot away, but this part that I'm about to read to you is where all the characters are having a Breakfast Club style talk as they're waiting for something inevitable to happen to them. And the time that these three characters have at the theater has been found out, and one of the characters, Lou, calls him out on it to see if he can get an answer. But my character Jules has a very unique way of giving answers. "What did you two do at the theater?" Lou asked as he tossed the rest of the expired cookies back on the desk. "Oh, that's right. You didn't hear about it. I played Velma Kelly, and Lance was Roxy Hart." Lou pouted his lips and rolled his eyes. "So who is Maitre Mama Morton?" Jules downed the rest of his second bottle of scotch. He smirked sarcastically as he says, "Obviously it was Cassie. Jesus Christ, dude." Yeah. "And what about Ace?" Jules raised his eyebrows as he continued to stare at his swollen, tattered, tattooed knuckles. He flexed his hands out and hummed at the damage. What rat told you about Mr. Cellophane?" I can't tell you how much fun that was to put more references of Chicago in there. I think I put more reference to that specific movie than any other movie in my book series Inglorious Inc., which is chock full of music and movie references. But with the fact that Chicago is both a movie and a piece of music as well, that you're basically just like watching a piece of music, it kind of feeds into itself as like this beautiful double-edged sword that kind of has like both right sides to it. And that was really fun to really reinvigorate my love for Chicago and getting to experience the songs again. And with the numerous references to Mr. Cellophane, I feel like I kind of highlighted a song that is known, and it's amazing job from John C. Reilly. But it gave me a further appreciation for a song that I kind of ignored because I was all about that "We Both Reached for the Gun" song, and after that I'm like, okay, I'm done with Chicago. But then when I went through the soundtrack again and made a reference to that for the sole purpose, like, you know, off the cuff, just that's the first thing that came to mind was Mr. Cellophane. And then now it's like, great, now that has become another cherished song of mine, and it's been redone solely because of the way that I changed the approach to Mr. Cellophane and putting that into the book. So I kind of gave myself a further appreciation for a song I didn't think so much of, and that was pretty cool. And I'm glad that I got to sort of breach my book series into my movie podcast, my movie and TV podcast, and get to make a little nod to it. So thank you for listening to that. I really appreciate it. It was very fun. It was fun to write it, and it was fun to talk about it. Well, this was a fun episode. I never really thought about the idea of musicals in quite some time, and this was a nice challenge to be presented on the show to talk about a certain genre that I respect, even though it's not really something that I would consistently watch over and over and over again. And, you know, everyone's got their own type of entertainment that they gravitate towards, and with being a movie buff, it's like I don't have to gravitate towards it, but I do want to know how I can be able to respect it. So whenever it's brought up in conversation, like, okay, I know the song and dance, no pun intended, and I can be able to learn a little bit more and be able to grow. And I'd love to be able to do more episodes in the Screen Queen that cover musicals and get to talk to some of my friends that are musical buffs and get to hear their history and their take and their whole definitions on this genre. Well, that is a wrap on the episode. Curtain closed, exit stage left for the Chicago episode. Thank you so much for being here. And now is the time to find out what the next episode is going to be on the Screen Queen. So here we go. I got my giant box of selections. I had to get another container because I had so many. It was overflowing. Okay, alrighty. So let me just go ahead and mix it up real quick. And then we're about to find out together what the next episode's going to be. Alrighty. Let me pull from the bottom. I got one. No, come on, get out of there. Where are you? Oh, snap. Oh, snap, this is cool. Awesome possums. Well, we are being treated to an underrated movie for the next episode on the Screen Queen. And this one is actually a new movie that I saw not too long ago that I've been recommending to all of my friends. So now I get to talk about it on here. Woo! All right. The next episode on the Screen Queen is going to be No Escape. Yeah, you really can't escape from that one. Sorry, it's coming to you next Sunday. Alrighty. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being amazing and supporting the show. I'm looking forward to the 50th episode for the Screen Queen. I got something planned in mind and it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. Alrighty. Well, you all take care now. Stay amazing. Don't forget to razzle dazzle everyone today. And also, it's Happy Mother's Day. I just realized that this episode's gonna land on Mother's Day. So Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. And if you're not a mother, then well, wish your mother a happy Mother's Day for me. You all take care now and stay amazing. Bye bye.